Hello, YouTube. There's a very unusual lake in Belarus, in Eastern Europe. The Gomel region, also known as Gomel Oblast, is one of the regions of Belarus. And the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir is what I'm going to be talking about. It's a round lake in the Gomel region of Belarus. The reservoir, it stands out from the general lists of round lakes. At least because, according to official data, this is a reservoir allegedly built in Soviet times. The water surface itself is not round, but the curved coastline is clearly the work of human hands and is more reminiscent of soil samples, for example, during sand mining. Also, the appearance of the coastline is strongly influenced by vegetation, for example, cattail on the island. However, when looking at this geographical object from above, it has a perfectly round shape with a characteristic island in the center. The diameter of the top of the soil dump is 1,720 meters. According to official data, this is a reservoir built in Soviet times. There are two local legends about it. According to one account, this lake was indeed built in Soviet times, but as a bowl for parabolic antenna for deep space exploration and the Global Navigation Satellite System, GLONASS. The second account says that this funnel was formed as a result of a secret nuclear weapons test by the Nazis during the World War II. According to this hypothesis, the nuclear explosion occurred a year and a half before the US strike on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Be that as it may, all accounts speak of the artificial origin of the lake. There's not a single one that claims a meteorite fall or a karst sinkhole. So even according to the official point of view, this is not a meteorite crater or a karst sinkhole. Moreover, it has even been officially confirmed that in Soviet times, reservoirs were indeed created using nuclear explosions. For example, Lake Chagan, 100 kilometers southwest of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. So, the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir in the Gomel region may well be such an object created by a nuclear explosion, especially if we exclude this meteorite and karst hypothesis of its origin. In open sources, it is not difficult to find a table of the correspondence between the power of a nuclear charge and the diameter of a nuclear funnel that appeared from the activation of this device. And the diameter of the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir, 1,700 meters, corresponds to the power of a nuclear explosion of approximately 70 megatons. Just think about it. This is despite the fact that the famous Tsar Bomba, detonated on October 30, 1961, is officially considered the most powerful nuclear explosive device in the history of mankind. It had a power of 58 megatons. The blast wave from the Tsar Bomba circled the globe 3 times. Of course, in Soviet times, it was simply unrealistic to hide the nuclear explosion that formed the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir, practically in the very center of Europe. Let's be clear about it. On many maps, including old ones, this place is simply marked as a swamp. Of the modern ones, the round lake is marked only on maps from the years 2000 and 2001. On maps from that period, on maps from other periods, this lake is not there. And oddly enough, even on the map of in the year 2022, it is also not there. Now, I'm using information provided by the researcher who was there in 2022, and I will tell you more. That is, the lake itself is there, but is not shown on the map. This is about how accurately the maps reflect reality. The absence of the lake on the maps up until 2000 is not at all an indicator of the absence of this object on the ground. There is one map from the 1950s. Exactly in the place of the round lake, there is a vast swamp. And the territory around it is marked with plots, just like on the modern map. Also, do note, such an important point, the design of the locks, which are located outside the soil dump. These locks indicate that the water level in the lake is much higher than around, despite the fact that the dump is filled with coarse sand. That is, the bottom and walls of the reservoir are sealed due to the melting of the soil. There are many swamps around the round lake, the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir, and the existing agricultural fields cut by narrow strips of canals are already drained swamps. Therefore, the hypothesis about the creation of the reservoir for agricultural purposes, for irrigation of fields, can be discarded immediately. For the arid steppes, or like savanna, of Kazakhstan, this hypothesis may well be suitable, but not for the swamps in the Gomel region. The hypothesis that this lake collects water from the surrounding swamps for their drainage is also not suitable because the sizes of the swamps and the lake are not comparable. The volume of water that is in the swamps can fill this lake in one season, and next year, where to put the water from the swamps, given that the water from the lake also will not go anywhere. Even if the agricultural purposes of this lake are spelled out in some official papers, then this can only be a cover for something bigger. But let's turn from conspiracy theories to facts. Nowadays, on the shore of this lake, there is a recreation center with cozy houses. The owner of the center received Belarus researchers in 2022 very warmly and accommodated them in one of the houses for free. There is sand everywhere and the so-called river sand of a large fraction. And this is despite the fact that there are swamps all around. The shore, the road, the forest, the soil heap. Sand is everywhere, even at the bottom of the lake. So as far as the researchers could get, since this shore drops sharply down, the water in the lake is relatively clear. There are fish, but the fish were released into the lake only recently. The soil dump has very little vegetation. On both sides of the dump, there is grass as tall as a person. And on the dump itself, there is practically bare sand. The radiation level is 0.09 microsieverts per hour. The height of the soil dump is about 15 meters. It consists of sand. The researchers note that the sand inside the ring is lighter than the outside one. This sand is of different densities. In this frame, it is clearly visible that when the lake was converted into the reservoir, the sand layer on the dump was disturbed. That is, the layers were mixed. Comparing the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir in the Gomel region with the same lake Chagan in Kazakhstan, we see many similarities, with the exception perhaps of the radiation level and the island in the center. The funnel of Lake Chagan was formed as a result of an underground nuclear explosion, and the funnel of the Mikhailovskaya Reservoir, judging by the island in the so-called suction zone, was formed as a result of a ground nuclear explosion. And here begins the most interesting part. To create the funnel, which would later become Lake Chagan, an explosive device of the purity level of 94% was specially developed. That is, 94% of the explosion energy was provided by the thermonuclear fusion reactions that do not produce radioactive products. At least this is what the official information on Lake Chagan says. On January 15, 1965, at the depth of 178 meters, the underground nuclear explosion was carried out, and the power of the explosive device was 170 kilotons. Currently, the diameter of the funnel of Lake Chagan is 580 meters, according to the information available. In the first month after the explosion, the increased radiation background was precisely on the dump, while at the bottom of the funnel, before it was filled with water, the radiation level, although increased, was much lower than on the soil dump. Lake Chegan is included in the list of areas particularly severely affected by nuclear tests. There is still a very high radiation level around the lake. At the Mikhailovsky Reservoir, the level of radioactive background is within the normal range. This is possible only in one case. The nuclear explosion was much earlier than 60 years ago. So much earlier that several half-lives have already passed. It is also important to note such the moment as the power of the explosion. There is a simple pattern that the higher the power of the charge, the larger the diameter of the funnel, and the less residual radiation, and the shorter the period of time it lasts. Half-life is a conditional definition showing the period of time during which, as a result of a nuclear decay reaction, the amount of a substance will decrease by half. Actually, that is why this is called that. The half-life of, for example, cesium-137 is approximately 30 years. Iodine-131 is about 8 days. We emphasize half of decay, not complete decomposition. This means that from the conditional kilogram of cesium-137 after 30 years, half a kilo will remain. After another 30 years, 250 grams. After another 30 years, 125 grams, and so forth. Every 30 years, the amount of substance will decrease by 2 times. Thus, after 180 years, from a conditional kilogram, about 15 grams will remain. The figures are absolutely arbitrary, just to make it easier to understand that after 200 years, it is very possible to find radioactive residue, but not with a dosimeter, but in an isotope laboratory. Naturally, in addition to cesium, there will be other nuclear fuel decay products and the remains of the nuclear fuel itself at the site of the nuclear explosion, but they all have their own half-lives. For example, the half-life of uranium-235 is 703.8 million years. Plutonium-244 is 80.8 million years. But here it is necessary to understand that the higher the power of a nuclear charge, the greater the amount of the original substance that has time to enter into a reaction. And high levels of radiation immediately after the explosion are maintained precisely by the decay products of uranium and plutonium, which are mainly short-lived. Examples with man-made nuclear accidents, such as Chernobyl or Fukushima, are not suitable because it is mainly nuclear fuel that is scattered there. Thus, after 200 years, the radioactive background at the site of a nuclear explosion may well be within normal limits, perhaps just a little higher than the surrounding area. And this is the difference that needs to be looked for, and traces of a nuclear explosion can, in most cases, only be found in an isotope laboratory. That is why at the site of an explosion, even of a clean charge, after only 60 years, the radiation level is very high. And at the site of a powerful charge explosion, after 200 years, there is practically no radiation. The Mikhailovsky Reservoir is not a karst sinkhole or meteorite crater. It is a completely artificial object with a sealed bottom and walls, but it is not part of an irrigation system or field melioration. Its absence on maps until 2000 does not at all indicate the absence of this object underground. This reservoir was not created in Soviet times by a nuclear explosion, although the only thing that could have created it was a nuclear explosion. Thus, judging by the level of radiation and the size, we can make an approximate conclusion about the power of the nuclear explosion at the time, how long ago it was. At this point, this is all the information available. The research was conducted by the person who has been operating under the cover name Неофициальная история. He has been doing research for over 10 years, during which time he has organized and participated in expeditions to a number of amazing and mysterious places in Eastern Europe. So that was his conclusion. So the reservoir was not created in Soviet times by a nuclear explosion, although the only thing that could have created it was a nuclear explosion. But let's look at an earlier account. Let's see if it becomes any less obscure. Belarus сегодня newspaper published the following in July of 2016. The perfectly round lake near Gomel has been attracting the increased attention of internet users for several years. Satellite maps made it possible to see the artificial geometry of the reservoir. Various hypotheses were put forward, from a meteorite crater to an old missile silo disguised as a water surface. There was a new information that was thrown, so to say, into the furnace of speculation by the Argentine writer of German origin Hans Ulrich von Kranz. In his book, The Secret Weapons of the Third Reich, he described the classified Nazi tests of nuclear weapons during World War II. So maybe the lake is the crater of the first atomic explosion in history. One journalist and one scientist decided to drive to the site to investigate. Stanislav Galkovsky was the journalist. The scientist was a Gomel physicist, inventor Vyacheslav Zaboronsky. Following this global sensation, they traveled to the destination, the place of the mysterious explosion, the south of Gomel region, on the road to village Novye Dyatlovichi. Gomelshchina, as the territory is called in local language. Somewhere nearby, judging by the map, there's a small village with an interesting name, translated into English as the Guiding Star, and the mysterious round lake. The scientist was sitting in the passenger seat. The possibility of finding the site of the first nuclear explosion on our planet interested him no less than it interested the omnivorous journalist. There was a field dosimeter in the backpack. The minimum task was to measure radiation at different points of the site and, if possible, take samples from the trunks of old trees. The approximate years of radiation contamination can be determined by their rings. On the way, the scientists read excerpts from that book by Hans Ulrich von Kranz. The Argentine writer said that he took information about the first nuclear explosion, which occurred a year and a half before Hiroshima, from the archival documents of his father, a former high-ranking SS officer. Here's what it said. The question was where to test this bomb. Of course, the deserts of North Africa would have become an ideal testing ground. By that time, the Germans had already been knocked out of there. East, there are significant deserted areas overgrown with forest, which is ideal for testing. Ultimately, after much hesitation, Himmler decided in December of 1943 to conduct tests in the western part of Russia, still occupied by the Germans, in the so-called Belarus. To do this, 3 SS divisions were deployed to the forest south of the city of Gomel. During January and February, they mostly coped with their tasks. The local population was driven to Germany. The partisans, guerrilla fighters, were pushed back to the other areas of Belarus. On March 3, 1944, an atomic bomb, the Loki facility, was delivered to the test site. The explosive device was installed in a remote swampy thicket. Several cars, animals, and a barrack with prisoners were placed nearby. In addition, SS sappers erected several more reinforced concrete buildings with walls of various thicknesses. Several tanks were placed around the epicenter of the future explosion. The physicists who created the atomic bomb, the leadership of the Ahnenerbe, and even the Reichsfuhrer SS himself gathered at the test site. All of them, of course, were in a specially built bunker dozens of kilometers from the bomb. At 11 a.m. Berlin time, the bomb was detonated. The destruction was terrible. Within a radius of several kilometers, the forest was completely destroyed, and if it had not been for the deep snow, the fire would have started to spread further. Only charred skeletons of people and animals remained. Reinforced concrete structures, however, survived, although not in the best shape. That's what it said. A suspicious story. Firstly, at the end of 1943, Marshal Rokossovsky troops drove the enemy back to Kalinkovичи, and the Soviet flag was already flying over these places. Secondly, it is difficult to hide such a powerful explosion from the opponents near the front line. But there is no other evidence than the writer's paternal documents. Well, the journalist, he admitted, lost heart. However, his companion Vyacheslav Zaboronsky approached the question with the optimism of a researcher thinking out loud. In such a lake, there should be an island in the middle. The shape of the crater is a classic crater from a ground-based nuclear explosion. The depth grows towards the center. The slide in the middle from the fallen rock from the suction zone is the legs of a mushroom. Our people could have classified the explosion so that there would be no panic at the front. The Germans did not need advertising either. It took time to create a means to delivering this contraption the size of a two-story house. The main trace, a radioactive funnel, was turned into a peaceful reservoir. To do this, they removed the surface layer of radioactive soil from the bottom of the funnel and laid it out in the form of a ring with a radius of 800 meters. The next layer of already cleaned soil from the bottom of the crater was used to bury this ring. It seems to work out well. In the middle of the cornfields, the team, that's how I'm going to refer to the journalists and the scientists to make it simple, was greeted by a young forest. A non-circular lake emerges from behind it. Well, where is their destination? According to the map, it's here. Indeed, instead of an answer, there is a sign, Mikhailovskaya Reservoir. Nearby, an elderly tractor driver is fiddling with his machine. Is this the round lake? And where's the circle? The tractor driver, Alexander, grinning, answers, you are standing on it. The dam is round. It was built back in the 1980s, but the reservoir is not working. There are houses for fishermen around the lake. Indeed, the picturesque lowland bordered by young fishing line is decorated with summer cottages, piers, gazebos, barbecues. There's not a single living soul around. A bright sign informs that fishing is prohibited. The reservoir is being stocked. But there's an island in the middle of the lake. The team measured radiation at different points of the circular space. Almost everywhere, 15 micro-rentgens per hour is the norm. If there is a radiation source here, it rests deep under the ground. It is useless to take sample of wood. All plantings are not older than 20 years. In general, their hypothesis remained far from reality. The strange shape was not the only feature of the lake. The reservoir was almost not used for its intended purpose. According to Sergei Gavrilenko, Deputy General Director of the Municipal Unitary Enterprise of Melioration and Water Management, Gomel Melio Vodkhoz. Here's what he said. The Mikhailovsky Reservoir was built in 1986. Unfortunately, it was not entirely successful. It was not possible to use it effectively. The design features do not allow this facility to be used in agricultural system. Therefore, by the decision of the district executive committee, the reservoir was leased. The tenant has built holiday houses stocking the reservoir. It turned out to be an interesting tourist area, and yet, having gained patience, the team seems to have managed to get closer to solving the story of the appearance of this strange lake in the fields of Palesia, as the area is known. It turned out that the neighboring village is called the guiding star for a reason. A famous astronomer, Vladimir Larionov, does not exclude that the circular reservoir solved space exploration problems. In the 1970s, the USSR developed a global navigation satellite system, GLONASS, which was launched in 1980s. The system was constantly being developed and supplemented. There were classified sections related to missile and anti-space defense, the journalist put his information in. The circular reservoir was most likely a facility for testing the system. Perhaps as a mirror, it reflected a signal for the communication of objects in space. It could also be about testing laser space systems in non-optical range. The reservoir was filled perhaps only once, and after the tests, it was transferred to the category of ordinary agricultural reservoirs. The journalist and the scientists, they tried to find documentation on this subject and the site, but without success. They were looking for an explosion crater, but they found only a cosmic mirror, and they left. And we are left with one question only. Who really created this reservoir? Whose hypothesis will prevail? But you got to find documents. And even that famous scientist, Larionov, he did not say for sure. We just don't know. And maybe we'll find out one day. I have other videos about other strange lakes, including one not far from Moscow of the round shape. So look at them. And I'll continue my research into the paranormal phenomena of Eastern Europe, of Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, and of course we'll go on to Central Asia and so forth. I have hundreds of videos that you can look at and find the one interesting to you. If you like my research and you can support my research, please do so through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please like my videos. Please subscribe to my channel and tell others. And I thank you for all your attention to my work.